The phone call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I remember the exact time because I was staring at my alarm clock, wondering if this was really happening. My sister Emma's voice was thick with tears. She needed $12,000. London. Study abroad program. Once in a lifetime opportunity. The usual script. But this time was different. This time, my parents had already made their decision before anyone bothered to call me. They sold my car. Not just any car. My 1967 Mustang Fastback. Candy apple red with black racing stripes. The car I'd worked 3 jobs to buy when I was 17. The car I'd spent every weekend for 2 years restoring in our garage, bleeding knuckles and burning through paychecks for original parts. The car that held every memory of my father and me actually getting along. Emma kept talking, but her words turned to white noise. Something about how sorry she was, how she didn't know they were going to do it, how she'd pay me back when she got her degree. I hung up without saying a word. The betrayal hit me like ice water. Not just the money, the principle, the complete disregard for everything I'd worked for. The assumption that my dreams were negotiable, that my achievements were family property. I sat in my apartment for 3 hours, staring at the wall, thinking about the last time I'd driven that car. 2 weeks ago, to a job interview at Henderson Financial. The interview that had changed everything. Because I got the job. Senior investment analyst. Starting salary that would make my parents' heads spin. But they didn't know that yet. I'd been planning to surprise them at Sunday dinner. Walk into their house with the employment contract and watch their faces transform from disappointment to pride. Finally, their unemployed son who'd been bouncing between retail jobs had made something of himself. Instead, I was sitting in the dark, calculating how much money I now had access to. Considerably more than $12,000. The next morning, I drove my beat-up Honda to Johnson's Classic Cars, the lot where my parents had sold my Mustang. The same lot where I'd originally bought it 6 years ago. Old man Johnson was behind the counter, probably wondering why I looked like I hadn't slept. Which I hadn't. He recognized me immediately. Started stammering about how sorry he was, how he'd tried to call me first, but my parents insisted they had the authority to sell. They'd used the spare key I'd left them. The spare key meant for emergencies. Apparently, Emma's education counted as an emergency. My dreams did not. Johnson offered to sell the car back to me for $15,000. Market value, he claimed. $5,000 more than my parents had received. I asked him who'd bought it. A collector from upstate. Already had it transported. My Mustang was gone. But something else caught my attention as I was leaving. A conversation between Johnson and his accountant about overhead costs, rising rent, difficulty keeping the business profitable. The gears in my mind started turning. Over the next 2 weeks, I threw myself into research. Johnson's Classic Cars was indeed struggling. The owner was 3 months behind on his business loan. The lot was hemorrhaging money despite decent sales. More importantly, the business was for sale. Quietly. Johnson didn't want word getting out to his competitors. I made an appointment with my new employer's lending department. Explained my situation carefully. My position.
My salary.
My very specific business interest. The loan officer was intrigued. Classic car dealerships, when managed properly, showed consistent profits. The market was stable. Collectors always needed inventory. Within 10 days, I had preliminary approval for a business acquisition loan. Johnson nearly fell off his chair when I walked into his office with an offer. Cash deal. Full asking price. Quick closing. He kept asking why I wanted to buy his business. I told him I'd always been interested in classic cars. Which was true. I didn't mention that I was specifically interested in his business because he'd sold my car. The paperwork moved faster than I'd expected. By the end of the month, I owned Johnson's Classic Cars. Johnson stayed on for 2 weeks to help with the transition. During that time, I learned everything about his customer database, his suppliers, his business relationships, including his relationships with local banks. Particularly his relationships with the financing department at First National, where my parents had gotten their car loans for the past 15 years. This was when I discovered that my parents had taken out a loan to buy Emma a brand new Honda Civic as a graduation gift. $22,000. Financed through First National. The same amount they'd pocketed from selling my car, plus the money they'd been saving for Emma's London trip. The timing was perfect. Emma was scheduled to leave for London in 6 weeks. The new car was sitting in my parents' driveway, waiting for her return. But loans have terms, and terms can be transferred. I spent the weekend reviewing my new business's financial relationships. Classic car dealerships often purchase individual loans from banks as part of inventory financing arrangements. It's standard practice when a dealership wants to offer direct financing to customers. What I found interesting was that First National regularly sold their auto loans to dealerships to free up lending capital. I called First National's loan department Monday morning, introduced myself as the new owner of Johnson's Classic Cars, explained that I was interested in purchasing some of their existing auto loans as part of my portfolio diversification. The loan officer was enthusiastic. They had several loans they'd be happy to sell at a discount. Asked for a list of available loans. Emma's Honda was on the list. The purchase price was $18,000 for a $22,000 loan. The previous owners had made exactly 2 payments. The discount reflected the early stage of the loan and the bank's desire to free up capital. I bought the loan that afternoon. By Thursday, Emma Madison was legally obligated to make her car payments to me. She had no idea. Neither did my parents. I waited 2 weeks. Let them get comfortable with their decision. Let Emma start planning her London adventure. Then I made my next move. I hired a private investigator to document the car's condition and location. Legal requirement for any potential repossession action. I needed photographs, proof of address, confirmation that the vehicle matched the loan documentation. The PI's report was thorough. The Honda was parked in my parents' driveway. Pristine condition. Recently washed. Emma had been driving it to her part-time job at the mall. I reviewed the loan terms carefully. The payment schedule. The default clauses. The repossession procedures. Everything was standard. Everything was legal. From a business perspective, this was straightforward debt collection. From a personal perspective, this was justice. The phone rang at 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. My mother's voice confused and panicked. A man had come to the house. Something about Emma's car loan. Papers about repossession. They didn't understand what was happening. I let her talk. Let her explain how Emma couldn't make the payments because she was leaving for London next week. How they'd already spent the money from my car on her plane tickets and program fees. How they needed more time. When she finished, I told her I'd look into it. Then I called the repossession company. The Honda was gone by noon. Emma called me crying. She'd come home from work to find an empty driveway and a notice on the door. The car she'd been driving for 6 weeks had been repossessed for non-payment. She didn't understand how this could happen. They'd been making payments. I asked her to read me the notice. The contact information listed Johnson's Classic Cars as the loan holder. She asked if I could call them, see if there was some kind of mistake. I told her I'd handle it. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. First time I'd been there since the night Emma had called about London. They were waiting in the living room. My father looked older than I remembered. My mother kept wringing her hands. Emma was on the couch, surrounded by crumpled tissues and financial documents she didn't understand. I sat down opposite them. My father started talking immediately about how they'd tried to reach me, how they didn't know what was happening with Emma's car, how they needed my help figuring out this loan situation. I listened to the whole speech. Then I told them about my new job, the salary, the career opportunities, the business acquisition. Their faces changed from confusion to surprise to something that looked like pride. My mother started to smile, started talking about how she'd always known I'd make something of myself. That's when I told them I owned the loan on Emma's car. The silence was brutal. Emma looked at me like I'd slapped her. My father's face went pale. My mother stopped wringing her hands. I explained how I'd bought the dealership, how I'd purchased the loan from First National, how Emma had missed her last payment. My father found his voice first, started talking about family, about how we needed to work together, about how they'd had no choice but to sell my car. I let him finish. Then I told them about the collector upstate, how my Mustang was gone, how they'd sold 6 years of my work for $12,000 without asking permission, how they'd used my spare key to steal my dreams. My mother started crying, talking about how they'd pay me back, how they'd figure out a way to make this right. I looked at Emma. She hadn't said a word since I'd started talking. I asked her if she still wanted to go to London. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I told her she could have her car back. Full ownership. Clean title. The room held its breath. Under one condition. She had to admit that what they'd done to me was theft. In front of the whole family. Right now. Emma looked at her parents. Then back at me. She whispered that she was sorry. That she'd told them not to sell my car. That she'd never asked them to do it. But that wasn't what I'd asked for. I repeated my condition. Emma took a shaky breath. She said they'd stolen my car, that it was theft, that they'd had no right to sell something that belonged to me. My father exploded, started yelling about how everything in their house belonged to the family, how I was being selfish and vindictive, how I was destroying the family over a car. I stood up. I told him he was right. I was vindictive. But I wasn't the one who'd started this war. I walked toward the door. Emma called after me, asked about the car. I turned around. I told her the Honda would be in their driveway tomorrow morning. Title transfer paperwork would be in the glove compartment. But I wasn't finished. I looked at my parents, told them they had 2 weeks to repay the $12,000 they'd taken from my car sale. With interest. If they didn't, I'd be filing a theft report with the police. My mother gasped, started talking about how they were family, how I couldn't involve the police in family business. I told her they'd stop treating me like family the night they sold my car. Now, we were just creditors and debtors. The drive home was surreal. I'd never spoken to my parents like that, never drawn such a clear line in the sand. Part of me felt sick. The other part felt liberated. I called the repossession company that night, arranged for the Honda to be returned to their driveway by morning. Then I called my lawyer, explained the situation, asked about the legal implications of filing a theft report against family members.
He was direct.
I had a case. Using someone else's property without permission, even with access to keys, constituted theft under state law. But he asked if I was sure I wanted to go through with it. I told him I'd decide in 2 weeks. Emma left for London on schedule. She sent me a text from the airport. 3 words. Thank you, Jake. My parents didn't call. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. No attempted contact.
No repayment. No epalegi.
I spent the time building my business, learning the classic car market, developing relationships with collectors and restoration specialists. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought a car dealership out of revenge, but I was actually good at running it. On the 14th day, my father showed up at the dealership. He looked exhausted, defeated. He sat down in my office and put an envelope on my desk.
$12,000. Cash.
I asked about the interest. He pulled out another envelope. $800. I counted the money carefully. He watched me, probably wondering when I'd turned into someone who'd make him pay interest on family debt. When I finished counting, I looked at him. He started talking about forgiveness,
About how we needed to move past this.
about how family was more important than money. I stopped him. I told him this was never about money.
It was about respect.
About consent. About not taking things that didn't belong to him. He said he understood. But I wasn't sure he did. 3 months later, Emma came home from London. She'd had an amazing time, posted hundreds of photos on social media, made connections that would help her career. She stopped by the dealership to see me. She looked different, more mature, more confident. She thanked me again for the car, for making her London trip possible. Then she asked if I'd found a replacement for my Mustang. I told her I was working on it. Which was true. I'd been tracking classic Mustangs across the country, looking for the right one, the perfect restoration project. But I'd learned something important over the past few months. The car itself wasn't what mattered. It was what the car represented. The hours I'd spent working on it, the skills I'd developed, the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. My parents had taken my car, but they couldn't take what I'd learned from building it. And they'd never be able to take what I'd built from losing it. The dealership was thriving. I'd hired 2 mechanics and a sales associate. We specialized in restoration projects and collector vehicles. Most of my customers were people like me, car enthusiasts who understood the difference between price and value. People who knew that some things couldn't be replaced with money. 6 months after Emma's return, I got a call from a collector in upstate New York. He'd heard about my dealership through word of mouth. He had a 1967 Mustang Fastback he was interested in selling. Candy apple red with black racing stripes. My heart stopped. I asked him to describe the engine modifications, the interior details, the small dent on the rear quarter panel that I'd never been able to completely fix. It was my car. The collector had bought it from Johnson, but he'd never really connected with it. Wrong color for his collection. He preferred blue or black. He was willing to sell it back to me for cost.
$18,000.
I drove upstate that weekend. Walking into his garage felt like stepping back in time. There was my Mustang, exactly as I'd left it. Same small imperfections. Same custom engine work. Same leather interior I'd restored by hand. The collector was a gentleman in his 70s. He understood what the car meant to me. He'd been in similar situations with his own collection. We agreed on $17,000. I wrote him a check on the spot. Driving my Mustang home was emotional in ways I hadn't expected. Not just joy or relief, but a complicated mix of loss and recovery. The car felt familiar but foreign, like visiting a childhood home that had been lived in by strangers. But it was mine again. The next morning, I called my parents. My mother answered. She sounded surprised to hear from me. I told her about the car, about buying it back, about bringing it home. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said she was happy for me. She asked if I wanted to bring it by the house, show my father the restoration work. I thought about it. I told her maybe someday. But not yet. The relationship with my parents had changed permanently. We spoke occasionally. Holiday phone calls, birthday cards, the basic maintenance of family connection. But the trust was gone. The assumption that we were automatically on the same side. They'd shown me exactly how they valued my dreams when those dreams conflicted with their priorities. That lesson couldn't be unlearned. Emma and I maintained a better relationship. She understood what had happened better than our parents did. She'd been caught in the middle, but she'd also benefited from their choices. She made good on her promise to pay me back. Not the car money. That debt was between me and our parents. But she insisted on paying for her London trip herself. She got a job at an international consulting firm after graduation, paid off her student loans early, bought her own car. She'd learned something from watching our family implode over money and property. She'd learned that independence was worth more than convenience. The dealership continued to grow. I hired more staff, expanded the restoration services, developed a reputation for honesty and quality work. I specialized in helping people recover cars they'd lost, tracking down vehicles that had been sold during divorces or financial crises, reuniting owners with cars that held memories money couldn't replace. It was therapeutic work, for me and for my customers. 2 years after buying back my Mustang, I received an interesting phone call. A lawyer representing Old Man Johnson's estate. Johnson had passed away, leaving behind a small collection of classic cars and a box of business documents. Among those documents were records of every car that had passed through his dealership, including detailed notes about customers and their stories. The lawyer had found Johnson's notes about my Mustang, about the day my parents sold it, about the day I bought his business. Johnson had written, "Kid's getting his revenge. Can't say I blame him. Family shouldn't steal from family. At the bottom of the note, he'd written an address. I drove to the address that weekend. It was a storage unit facility outside town. The unit contained Johnson's personal collection for classic cars, all in various stages of restoration. According to his will, he'd left the entire collection to the young man who understood what these cars really meant. The lawyer handed me the keys. Among the cars was a 1969 Camaro SS, cherry red. Numbers matching. Exactly the kind of car I dreamed about when I was 17. But more than the cars, Johnson had left me his business philosophy, his customer records, his network of collectors and restorers, the foundation of a legacy. That night, I sat in my garage, looking at my collection. 5 classic cars in various stages of restoration, each one representing a story, a relationship, a piece of automotive history. My phone rang. Emma, calling from her apartment in the city. She'd gotten engaged. Wanted to know if I'd walk her down the aisle since our father and I weren't speaking. I was quiet for a moment. I told her that was our father's job, that she should work things out with him. But I'd be honored to restore a classic car for her wedding day. Something special. Something that would make the day memorable. She started crying. Happy tears. She said that would be perfect. After we hung up, I thought about forgiveness, about family, about the difference between justice and revenge. I'd gotten my car back. I'd built a successful business. I'd learned to value independence over approval. But I'd also lost something. The innocence of believing family relationships were unconditional. The assumption that the people who loved you would never betray your trust for their own convenience. Maybe that loss was worth it. Maybe learning that lesson early had saved me from bigger betrayals later. Or maybe I'd paid too high a price for pride. The garage was quiet except for the tick of cooling metal and the distant sound of traffic. I walked over to my Mustang, ran my hand along the hood, felt the familiar curves and imperfections. Tomorrow, I'd start working on Emma's wedding car. Something beautiful and meaningful. Something that would bring the family together, at least for one day. But tonight, I was alone with my cars and my choices. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, full of stories waiting to be restored, full of lessons learned the hard way. In the distance, another classic car drove by, the sound of a well-tuned V8 engine echoing off the buildings. Somewhere out there was another kid working 3 jobs to buy their dream car. Another family making decisions that would change everything. Another story waiting to unfold. I turned off the garage lights and headed inside. Tomorrow was another day in the car business. And I had work to do.